Peak performance, when and why it matters in the workshop. Join passionate automotive trainer and coach Andrew Uglow as he explores the challenges faced by technicians in the automotive industry and compares it to the sporadic nature of peak performance in sports. The discussion highlights the unreasonable expectations placed on continuous peak performance and the importance of discretionary effort, sustainable practices, and proper acknowledgement in achieving true excellence. I'm your host, Anthony Pearl, and this is the Frictionless Workshop podcast. Let's get cranking. I want to ask you the question of, is it worth it? Because there's a difference between, and we'll come to it in another episode of, unpacking the whole idea of peak effort. But the idea of, is it worth it, is a completely different question.
So let me give you a bit of a story. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, because that's how all our stories start, right? I think most people, and certainly most people I know, at one stage were younger, quite obviously, and some of us were dumber. Some people just got old. Some people got old and smart. I'm hoping I'm in the latter category, but people will make their own assessment on that. But I was really fortunate to be able to do a school tour of Western Australia. So I was in year 7, I think. So I was young and very enthusiastic and not so experienced. And part of our school tour took us to the Stirling Ranges in Western Australia. And the Stirling Ranges is Bluff Knoll is the highest peak in WA. And it's just over 1,000 metres. I think it's 1,050 or something like that. And where we'd been living at the time was in a fairly remote place. And the highest part of where we lived was 3 metres above sea level. And so going from 3 metres above sea level to like 1,000 metres above sea level was really quite a significant thing. So when the school group got there, we decided to hike to the top, which we did. And, you can appreciate someone used to 3 metres above sea level standing 1,000 metres above sea level was really quite an experience, quite remarkable. Anyway, the time came for us to head back down again. And I felt the call of nature around about that time. And as the group started to make their way down, I slunk off. And I figured at the time that I'd never really get another opportunity to do this. So I decided that I would whiz off the highest part of the mountain, just no one else around. The opportunity was there. I was, like I said, younger and dumber than I am presently. And it seemed like a lot of my bad ideas, they started out as good ideas. And this seemed like a good idea at the time. So I did. And as I'm standing there attending to myself, I notice the trees below. You can see all the trees start to lean in one direction. And part of the reason that we were going to move down at a bit of speed was this storm was coming in. You could see it on the horizon, the dark clouds, all that sort of stuff. We know what it looks like. And I'm watching all these trees move in one direction as this big gust of wind starts coming across the bottom of the mountain. And I can see it start to move up the side of the mountain towards me. And that part of our brain that has the common sense that says, maybe now would be a good time to face the other way. I entirely ignored because, like I said, I was younger than dumber, and I decided that, oh no, I'm actually going to whiz into the breeze. Because why wouldn't you, right? And the really funny thing was that it didn't seem to matter how much I grunted. It didn't matter how red my face went. What I discovered was that the return on my effort was just not worth it. And fortunately, it rained shortly after that, so there was no evidence of my mistake. And everyone got soaked coming down the mountain, so no one could tell the difference. But that concept of whizzing into the breeze and realizing that it doesn't matter how hard you try, how much effort you put in, it's the return that you get is not worth it, is certainly something that I'm seeing a lot of, where people start to realize after, in this case, in the automotive industry, shifting the context from whizzing off a mountaintop to and putting a lot of effort into that, to shifting that into what we invest in our careers, right? So you look at automotive technicians, they invest an enormous amount in terms of time, learning, their own money for tools. We talk about discretionary effort, which we're going to dig into a little bit more detail, technician engagement. And this question of, well, is it really worth me investing like I have when this is the return that I'm getting? And there's been several people that I connected with on on LinkedIn, a gentleman, Vincent Castello. And Vince, if you're listening, shout out to you. He lives in America. He's a certified ASE tech, clever guy, foreman, been in the trade for over a decade. And he posted a photo of his toolbox in his garage at home, and then went into detail about why it was there and how he'd given up on the trade because it simply exploited him, to use his words. And he'd moved into mechanical maintenance, and just how much better paid he was, how much better respected he was, how much better treated he was. And to that question then of, well, is it worth the effort? And again, given here's this guy who's put in an enormous amount of time, effort, money, attention, detail, resources. And his argument was, well, no, it's not. Much like my experience on Bluff Knoll, no, it wasn't worth the effort. And so he's not the only one. Like, there's been several stories of late from people that I follow who have been, what's the word I'm looking for, really disappointed. They had a Bluff Knoll experience, for want of a better description, but in their workplace, in their career, and the return on their effort just simply wasn't worth it. And so when we start to talk about this whole concept of technician engagement, why would I, as a technician, engage and put in this discretionary effort, put in this extra that's needed, expected, requested, demanded even? Why would I do that if it's not worth it?
Do you know what's interesting though? You using your Olympics analogy, there's another Olympic story, isn't there, that's complete opposite from a few years ago. A certain gentleman by the name of Stephen Bradbury, who was putting, and you could question, is it worth it? Because that's the interesting thing about, use that athlete comparison. By past experiences and things that you're not going to be the fastest, that you're going to compete, you're up there, you've qualified for the Olympics, but you're not going to win. And you know that in your heart, but you're still putting in the effort. But then you just don't know. Everyone in front of you could just fall over.
And I know people, there's that expression, I did a Bradbury, and fair enough. And at the same time, the guy was smart enough to realize what was going on. I go, okay, so was he the fastest on the ice? On the day, yeah, he was, because he saw what was going on, that level of awareness, that attention to detail, those distinctions that maybe the other people didn't pay attention to or didn't notice, he did. And remember, just to even make the Olympics, never mind make the finals, right? You can't be a peanut, you can't just be a also-ran. You've got to be of a pretty high standard just to show up for the final. So I think more power to his arm. I reckon congratulations and well earned.
The Frictionless Workshop podcast is brought to you by Solutions Culture. For details on how to get in touch with Andrew, consult the show notes below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now, back to the podcast. But what's interesting is as well, I suppose at the other end of the automotive industry, you've got, the peak area of around Formula One, and you look at you talk about, is it worth it? And there are minutes of seconds that can make that difference. And you think that's amazing over 50, 70 laps, depending on the race. You think, how is that sort of small little thing but it makes a difference. And I think it's being able to get people to buy into that, because obviously if you've got a high performing team like that, you do buy into that culture. But how do you do that at a lower, at a level of a day-to-day workshop? It's not quite Formula One, but it's, it still matters.
Well, this gets back to that question, doesn't it? What makes it worth it? Now, take my Bluff Knoll experience. If the breeze hadn't come, that would have been well and truly worth it. But you can't change what happened. You can learn from it, though. And let me tell you, I certainly did learn from that, and decided never to do that again. And so far, so good. I look at these other technicians that are posting things online saying, I'm done. I'm out of the trade. I want to go back and I want to ask the question, what makes it worth it? And this is, and we've touched on this in previous podcasts. This is why it's so important as workshop management, workshop leadership, workshop ownership, that it becomes not just about the money. Because when it's only about the money, now there's nothing wrong with being profitable, right? That is a very sound, sensible business practice, and so it should be. There's nothing wrong with tracking KPIs. There's nothing wrong with doing all of those things that we do. But when it only becomes about profitability, for the technicians that work in large dealer groups, when it becomes about the shareholders as the pinnacle of their performance, well, I'm sorry, that just doesn't cut it for technicians. It's just not worth it when it's only about that. Now, should you abandon those people? No, of course not. But you've got to have more than that in order for it to be worth it. And this gets back to what we were talking about with the whole discretionary effort and not having peak performance, not offering peak performance. It what's the word I'm looking for? It confounded me that people would even consider that. And so I don't know about you, but I was profoundly curious at how is it that you don't offer peak performance? Like, why wouldn't you do your absolute best? And I said, surely there's got to be jobs that come in that, Mr. Smith is a customer or Mrs. Smith is a customer and you know them personally. And this is, the fifth car that they've owned and bought to you. You get on well with the person. Something's happened entirely outside of their doing, and it's a Friday afternoon. And like, we know the stereotypical problem. Why wouldn't you go and do the extra mile? Why wouldn't you go to peak performance and just go, right, screw getting paid. I need to look after the customer. Screw, this, that, and the other thing. Screw all the limitations that I would normally work to. I'm pulling out all the stops. I'm just going to solve this because Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, whoever the person is a great customer, and they need to be looked after because that's the right thing to do. And they said, that happens all the time. We get lots of those. And I said, do you still not do peak performance then? And they said, no. I'm just going, oh, well, that's interesting. Why wouldn't you do that? Now, understand that this is coming from a room of very experienced people. These are not mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging, forward-sloping, spanner-spinning individuals, all right? Now, I know that there is a stereotype about grease monkeys and all the rest. These are not those people. And they said they had learnt never to show what they were capable of because that would be expected all the time. Now, just think about that. That would be expected all the time. They would be expected to pull out all the stops, to drop all of the barriers and just perform at 100%, everything that they know. They're very, very best. Think of like Olympic athlete performance, like people going for the gold medal. There is no holds barred, like within the rules, but there's no holds barred. No one's going, gee, I've got another final tomorrow. Better hold something back. No. But that's expected all the time. I don't know about you, but that strikes me as insane to expect that of your people. To expect it for a once off because Mr. Smith is a great customer, I think that's fair. But to go, well, this customer and this customer and this customer should get exactly that. You should be working at the absolute pinnacle of what you're capable of. I'm going, well, no, I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think it's even sustainable. Never mind reasonable.
It is a interesting dilemma because when it's interesting because we were using sports analogies before and we all get frustrated whatever football code you follow. If you follow a football team, we get frustrated when we watch our team have a bad week. And we watch as we're thinking as well, when is the right time to peak? How do you master that idea? Because obviously you want to peak at the grand final, right? You want to peak. Right. You want to be getting better and better till you get to the grand final when you're at the ultimate of your peak ability. And does that mean that for round one of the competition, you're not at your peak? More than likely. But it's also measured against making sure that not everyone else is at their peak, because otherwise you can find yourself, without any points on the table after a few weeks because other people are at their peak and you're not. And I think So sport is a difficult one in that sense that you have to time it, but we don't think of that in a business sense very often, do we? That when is the right time to manage a peak performance for?
It would be like expecting Kathy Freeman to sprint at her absolute fastest going for the mail and going shopping and walking the dog or dragging the dog, presuming she has one. Like if you expect peak performance all the time out of an athlete, that would be everywhere they go. They're absolutely doing the very, 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 very best that they possibly can. And I think this goes beyond the concept of excellence, right? There's a difference between excellence and peak performance. Excellence is doing the best you can with the time, the resources you've got, and holding yourself to high standards and so on and so forth. We're not talking about that. We're talking about where we're expecting Kathy Freeman to sprint every time her feet touch the ground. Like, Kathy, you took 10 minutes to get to the cafe today. You should be able to do that in 3. Why didn't you run faster? That's the type of thing that we're doing. And these technicians had learnt not to show it. And several of them had actually left jobs because it was asked of them to go and perform, to pull something out of the hat. This is a rare one off all of those things, the known customer, the problem that wasn't their fault, the this, the that, show some compassion, show some stuff. And they pulled a miracle out of their hat, fixed the car. And here's the very next car and they're expecting the same miracle. And here's the very next car and and it's like, well, hang on a minute. No, that's like expecting Kathy Freeman to be sprinting the whole time. I think the misnomer is that what they offered was discretionary effort, and discretionary effort is up to the person offering the effort. It's not to be demanded by the people who run the business. They can demand excellence, and rightly so. But that level above that, well, that's entirely up to the technician. And with respect, there needs to be something in it for the technician to do that. That needs to be worth it for the tech to do that, and to demand to position them or manipulate them into a place where they have to perform at that level all the time. You're just going to burn them out. And how does that play out for your business then?
I mean, this is a consequence a little bit of machines, isn't it? Because you can expect, although even with machines, they don't perform at 100% peak performance consistently for long periods of time either. But mentally, we think they do. Mentally, we think they're a machine, they're programmed to do something, they're going to perform at the optimal level every single time. That's why we have machines in place. And that contrast of humans competing with machines, particularly in somewhere where, in the automotive industry where that's a real thing, it's a difficult one for management to get their head around, isn't it?
Well, there's a distinction that I think, like you mentioned Formula One, and Formula One is the pinnacle of automotive. It really is, much like MotoGP. These machines are built explicitly, specifically to perform for a certain amount of time and no more. And so when we start to look at that concept of peak performance, for Formula One, they have very specific warm-up. Like, it's not a little thing. They don't just push them out onto the track, run the hand crank and off we go, right? They've been in the garage for 30 minutes going through all of their warm-up procedures. They have specific fuel for qualifying. It is a thing for them. And the way they qualify is very different from the way they run on the track, right? That's a whole different set of programming. And so there is a ramp up and a ramp down for the vehicles. It's the same as athletes, right? They have a ramp up leading to a meet, an Olympic event, or nationals, whatever it is. And so that they have this ramp up, and then they're at their peak performance for that event. And then there's this ramp down afterwards. That there's this rest, relaxation, recovery, All that sort of same with Formula One, same with drag racing. They strip the engine right back to nothing and rebuild it carefully, bit by bit by bit, so it's ready for the next run. I want to ask where that is if you're expecting peak performance from your tech the whole time. Where's the ramp up? Where's the ramp down? Where's the recovery? This is what I'm saying, that I think it's entirely unreasonable. And the fact that these guys who'd been in the industry so long knew what was going to happen if they overperformed, and that overperformance would then be expected all the time.
Thank you for listening to the Frictionless Workshop podcast. For details on how to get Andrew working with you and your technicians, take a look at the show notes. There's also a link to some special content you can access. I'm Anthony Pearl, reminding you to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.